Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, this is always really fun for me. I'm hoping to make it enjoyable for you too. That I get to research these fantastic topics in order to come talk to you about them. So I've already had my fun, and now I get to share it with you. We're talking about the soul today, and that's a really big topic. And it means we're talking about what we are. And you really can't get more personal and more immediate than that. What are we anyway? So I've been researching this, and there are a lot of opinions about what we are, turns out. Religious, philosophical, esoteric. I'm going to try to cover some of the different points of view. But even in this room, each person's conception is different, I'm sure. So we have to look at what we might agree on about what we are first. Let's try to start from that. Well, we know that we are something. We're somebody. And we're in motion. You know, we're doing things. We're active. We're alive. Well, that actually corresponds really well to 2 out of the 3 primary points that Henry Lawrence makes, that he says was the essence of Pythagoras' teaching about 2,800 years ago. He said that Pythagoras taught something called hylozoics, which is about life being and everything, but that Lawrence, I think, is the one who's really brought through what Pythagoras taught. You can't find it anywhere else. He said there are 3 fundamental aspects to everything, and we've just touched on 2 of them. One is matter, being something. The other is motion. And the third a priori element of everything that you can't deduce or prove or dissect is consciousness. Matter, motion, and consciousness. So there you have the fundamental basis of all of the teachings of hylozoics, of Pythagoras. Everything else can be derived from that. These 3 fundamental assumptions are the beginning. And in fact, the whole point of the matter and motion is the evolution of consciousness, is what hylozoics says. So if we're talking about the evolution of consciousness, let's have a look at our own consciousness for a second. I like to start talks with this same exercise. If you've been here before, you've done this before. Self-consciousness is the particular thing that makes us human versus animals that don't have that same kind of awareness, certainly versus plants that have purely subjective awareness. There's a whole gradation of consciousness through the kingdoms, and what enabled us to make the jump to the human kingdom, we'll go into that more later, but the kind of consciousness is how progress is measured, the unfolding of consciousness. We've unfolded to a somewhat limited degree so far in the human kingdom, self-consciousness. That means we can be aware of our own choices, of our own idea of being a self, and of consciousness itself. And what Esoteric says is that where the attention is where the self is. So take a moment and think about where your attention is originating from, within yourself. That's the self, the point from which you're viewing everything. There's actually quite a useful benefit to thinking that way, because we don't do it very often, and we suffer the consequences of another kind of consciousness, which is automatic mechanical consciousness, where our old patterns rise up out of some stimulation. You know, somebody cuts us off, somebody says something. Well, we've been there and done that before, right? So we have an automatic response to it. That's not self-consciousness. That's just a pattern asserting itself. And it's actually the kind of consciousness in which we make a lot of mistakes and hurt other people and make ourselves unhappy. If you can actually stay in your consciousness, be choosing what you think about, then you're going to be creating what you're thinking about along the lines of your own choice, instead of being in a reaction mode that wastes an awful lot of time. So I guess the interesting thing about what we are in hylozoics is that it doesn't mince words. It's not like we're a cloud of consciousness. It doesn't say that we're a collection of experiences. It's very specific in saying that we're not bodies, that we're not collections of experience or memories or a sequence of events that just keeps going because it got started somehow, which is something you read in scientific approaches to descriptions of consciousness. It says that when you boil us down to our essence, that the point from which we are perceiving everything is literally a point of matter, the tiniest possible unit of matter. And it was called the monad, which is Greek for unit. And that is the ultimate building block of everything. Everything is built out of these points of matter that are the smallest indivisible points of matter and of consciousness and of motion. Now, when you think about it, what else could we actually be? Could we really be a collection of this and that? Well, then what happens when some of us leaves? I mean, the thing about the monad is that it's absolutely indivisible, indestructible, eternal. It's not subdividable. It doesn't die. I mean, it's this core idea of what we are it was one of the most beautiful things, I think, in hylozoics, because that gives us the encouragement to recognize our own destiny from billions of years of struggle to where we are now and take credit for everything it took to become human. Because that's what Lawrence says that the monad is doing, is evolving through all the kingdoms of nature in a series of expansions of consciousness. In us, we are the most advanced monad in this physical, emotional, and mental body that makes us up. We are the point of consciousness that needs all the rest of this to express and contact this world and the emotional and the mental worlds. It's all bodies. The idea actually applies to each cell in our body. There's a monad that is the primary point of consciousness there. It applies to planets. There's one monad that is the most advanced point of consciousness in the entire planet. All the rest of the planet is required to be its medium of expression. And that's the path we're on. Every monad goes through the entire multi-eon cycle of opening up its consciousness, mineral kingdom, mineral kingdom of just absolutely passive, simply being acted upon, plant kingdom of subjective awareness of the body and reaching for the light, animal kingdom of objective awareness, finally, objective consciousness that kicks into play and you can actually move and see, and then the big breakthrough to the human kingdom where we actually are conscious of our consciousness. And interesting thing after that, there's another kingdom, of course, and it keeps going and going. And the next consciousness jump is into collective consciousness. That's something we're preparing for by clearing out all the egotistic aspects of ourselves. We're not going to be welcomed into collective consciousness if we are selfish and self-involved and trying to misuse our powers with others in the world. But by the time we get all of that cleared out, then we can start to think about joining the next kingdom of consciousness, which, interestingly enough, is called the kingdom of souls in some of these philosophies. Now, these other explanations that we find, I'm going to go into them, and they certainly weren't adequate for me. I had to look a lot harder to find something that I could be satisfied with years ago. But we also have to keep in mind that in esoterics, we're trying to build a mental system to fit all of our experiences and our facts into, to make sense of them. Not everybody needs a mental system. And we should not be judging people for not having a mental system. There are people who accept religious explanations that to me are bafflingly illogical, but that doesn't mean they don't actually have things worked out to their own satisfaction, and that's the important thing. And my motto is, don't mess with happy. If someone is happy with their understanding of things, it's working for them. Let them go with it, and they're going to learn their own way. Also, while we might be tempted to judge those whose mental systems are based on, basically tribal superstitions and things that religions are built out of often, it's not very wise to judge them on that, because we only need a mental system ourselves while we're in this mental phase. When we get to the next phase, the level of consciousness of the soul, we don't need a mental system there either, because we can just directly experience and understand everything that there is to know. It's obvious on that level. We need the mental system here because the human kingdom is trying to struggle with its ignorance. And so we have to piece facts together and come up with something that works. We're not going to really ascertain all the facts with human consciousness. It's not till we get, well, not till we get to the level of the soul. In the human kingdom, we can actually start to learn some really good things. We'll get into that. And actually, one of the greatest achievements in not judging others is knowing that you shouldn't. So I just had to mention somebody you might judge could be somebody who's already figured that out, and that puts them ahead of you, I have to say. Okay. Now, I can't verify these. I'm not a causal self. I'm not a soul-level person. I can't verify these facts through my own senses, my own experiences. So I'm relaying what has made common sense to me, what I've learned from research, what fits together and overlays the various, in the various knowledge traditions. I can find the same truth resonating through all of them, basically because there's only one reality. All of these things are trying to describe the one reality. This is a sign of the times these days that people even doubt that there can be one reality, that everybody's in their own reality, and that can you really know anything, and is there such a thing as truth? This is actually not something to be too alarmed about, because we go through this every 2,500 years. As the zodiac, as the signs change, all the old institutions and ways of thinking about things have to dissolve, and waves of barbarians incarnate to make sure it does. The old ways of thinking and building and art and music, all of that get destroyed, really. It's natural. We shouldn't be too upset about it, because what's going to be built is much better. The new age that's coming in is going to be built in ways that that's the problem, that we can't really see that all yet. So there's not much reassurance. We don't see the good things coming very clearly. But hanging on to the old things is not going to work. Let's have a look at some of the views of the soul that are out there right now that many of us may have encountered. And like I said, we're talking about opinions here. I don't mean to criticize these religious views. A lot of people hold these things very strongly, and write off everything I say as an opinion. Feel free to do that. I am pointing out some of the weaknesses I see in these explanations so that I can get into what I think is a better explanation. In Christianity, we have the idea of the soul as a kind of a subtle version of yourself that detaches at death and is then judged. It carries with it the responsibility for everything you've done and can go to eternal hell or eternal heaven, each of which is equally boring. Because what's missing from the description is the understanding that everything is developing and everything changes. So how can anybody be content to be in eternal bliss or eternal hell? It's just, what about the evolution? What about changing? That's missing entirely, actually, from this idea that we're just kind of this little brief, flicker of life in a geological time frame. And this just instant of physical incarnation, and everything in eternity is decided. That's kind of a limited view of the soul. I mean, that's it, really? It's all over? There are variations on this, the resurrection of the dead, when the soul is the body is reformed, goes back to the body to be judged. In most Christian views, the soul can be saved. So, not quite sure what the benefit of that is if you have to go to heaven or hell anyway. And all mistakes forgiven through Jesus' sacrifice. And according to Esoterics, that's actually, Christ came to anchor love and brotherhood very tangibly in this earth, to actually teach it and get the idea across. And the ideas of him being the sacrificial lamb and things like that were grafted on later and don't really actually serve the initial message. Lawrencey can be kind of harsh, I have to tell you. I really encourage you to read it, because he just lays it out there so clearly, so much more clearly than I'm describing it or anything else I've read. He can be kind of tough on human, he doesn't call human ideologies, he calls them etiologies, as in idiocy. And, when you hear him say, humanity in its idiocy accepted the leadership of the black magicians instead of the hierarchy, and now we're all paying for it. Okay, we're humans, we can be offended a little bit that he's insulting us. But there's an awful lot of idiocy out there, and I think actually it's more likely he's being accurate. He quotes philosopher Lin Yutang about Christianity. According to Christianity, God was so angered when Adam had eaten an apple that he condemned the whole human race to eternal hell. But when they murdered his son, he was so delighted that he forgave them everything. Lawrence says that's the point of view of an unbiased look at Christianity. So my looking at Christianity for information about the soul didn't turn up as much actually as some of the other religions. Now Buddhism there's an emphasis in Buddhism on the not self. And that's a constructive thing in that it gets us away from our ego. But I think that emphasis is so strong that it doesn't leave room for a concept of a soul that is above and beyond incarnations. And that's kind of a problem because I'm reading the Buddhist scholars trying to explain because reincarnation is accepted in Buddhism by most. So how do you get from one lifetime to the next? And the explanation I was reading was that the last things you think in your life set in motion, and you pick up where you left off when you're born again. It's the thing I was talking about earlier, the sequence of events that just keeps itself going because this is happening, so the next thing has to happen. And that's just not quite enough of an explanation. It doesn't put any individuality into it. And in fact, I think you can get into some real trouble, at least from my understanding with esoterics, you get in some real trouble with the idea of the not self, get carried away with that, and think that at death or enlightenment, we're just merged into everything and that's it for our individuality. That does not seem to be the case in esoterics. I think a good example of that would be Mars and Jupiter. They're very different. They've retained their individuality. They're different physically, they're different astrologically, personalities, energies, colors, sizes, number of moons, everything is different about them, yet they were once human. If you follow esoterics, here, the monad that each of these planets now represents was once human. It had to go through the whole mineral, emotional, went through all the kingdoms. Took billions of years, I suppose, to get to the point of needing a whole planet for one's vehicle of manifestation. But they retained their individuality, obviously. And what esoteric says is that we are continually adding to our individuality with our choices, the path of service we take, the qualities we acquire. Each of us has, when you consider the number of incarnations and kingdoms we've gone through, each of us has had a completely unique set of experiences. And it's no wonder we're as different as we are. It's kind of surprising we're not more different. So I think it's actually kind of a beautiful side of the esoterics to think that as we evolve, we become ever more unique and beautiful contributions to the universe and not become more like each other and more homogeneous or dissolve away into no identity anymore. So with Buddhism, that seems to me to be a problem. At least they've got reincarnation as a general idea. If you look at Islam, there's a really good statement in the Quran. And they ask you, O Muhammad, about the soul, say, the soul is of the affair of my Lord, and mankind has not been given knowledge of it except a little. That's actually pretty accurate. You know, we haven't been given a lot of knowledge. It's only recently that this kind of information I'm talking about was put out with the help of Madame Blavatsky first and other teachers. It was reintroduced to humanity after a long, dark period.
Would you mind repeating that with the Quran?
Oh, the quote was, let's see, where did it go? Oh, and they ask you, O Muhammad, about the soul. Say, the soul is of the affair of my Lord, and mankind has not been given knowledge of it except a little. And I've got the Quran reference numbers if anybody's interested. But so much more has been said anyway. I mean, they really would have been better off leaving it at that, because that's really where it's at. The rest of the information wasn't there, but it's so easy to get lost trying to follow the scholars as they tease this apart and try to come up with ideas about the soul. And speculation is wild, and it goes for Christianity and all of these. As soon as the scholars get a hold of it, they speculate. And this is something you won't find in Lawrency. he makes quite a point out of not speculating. He's putting out the ideas that have come to him, that he's worked on through his connections, and we don't really know where the ideas come from, and they shouldn't be accepted blindly, but he's made a point of it not being a personal speculation. There's good stuff there too in Islam. There's the plant soul, animal soul, rational soul idea, which corresponds to the bodies that we have, emotional body, mental body, rational body. They've got heaven and hell and a resurrection there, resurrection of the dead for judgment, equally scary. At death, angels wrench the stinky souls from the dying bodies of unbelievers. Stinky. And while the fragrant souls of believers leave the bodies happily at the request of the angels. I can't say that doesn't happen. Despite all the talk about the 72 virgins, what I found in reading the books was that the martyrs could expect to be green birds in the cages hanging from the throne of Allah.
Green birds.
Green birds of paradise hanging in cages hanging from the throne of Allah was the fate of the souls of martyrs. Although they could petition Allah to go back and be killed again. So, okay, it's just tough to get anywhere with that. Hindu teaching, there's the idea of Atman, and they've got a couple of the key concepts that we're lacking in Christianity. They've got reincarnation, definitely there, that's good. Soul, definitely. Identity of individuality that can carry on from lifetime to lifetime. And they've got karma, cause and effect, so that what seeds you plant, you reap in future lifetimes. So they've got a couple of good aspects there. But again, I got lost almost immediately trying to research it, to tell you the truth, because there's so many Sanskrit words describing this and that, and they don't even seem to be consistent. You'll describe this in one philosopher's and this in another's. And I kind of agree with Lawrencey that for our Western minds, we're better off with a more technical, rather dry approach that doesn't use Sanskrit words, that uses the numbers, the worlds, because the only kind of naming system is going to hold up indefinitely. Lawrencey numbers the physical world, world 49, emotional 48, mental 47. Right there, you're already in trouble. You get into Greek philosophy, the mental world is called the noetic. Every philosophy's got its own different name for it. So if we're ever going to bring these things together, we're going to have to come up with some kind of consistent terminology. There is a problem in some of the Hindu thinking about the soul, according to esoterics. The idea that you could reincarnate as an animal is absolutely forbidden, actually, by the very fact of what made us human. And we'll get into that more later. But to have achieved the consciousness breakthrough of self-consciousness means you can never again be an animal. You can't go backwards. Certainly not a plant. So that's a little messed up. But shamanism has an interesting idea that parts of the soul can get lost or just be detached somehow, and that a shaman healer, will find those for you and bring them back and make you whole, and then you'll feel better and get over whatever problems you have. And I think when I read that, I had to dig into it a bit more. I realized that there's a semantics issue there, that part of what they're talking about, when they talk about soul in the shaman tradition, they talk about something you need to heal and purify and clean up. And that, their idea of the spirit corresponds more to the idea of the soul in esoterics, of this higher light-filled self that is beyond human ignorance and fear and all that sort of thing. So it's an interesting split, to split the idea of the soul up that way. To talk about the soul in terms of the immortal, divine, beautiful self and the dirty, messed up self that it has to get cleaned up. And really, I guess in esoterics, you'd think of that as the personality. From lifetime to lifetime, our personalities carry over the trends that we've had, the patterns, certainly the karmic effects of the actions we've taken. And I'll get into that a little bit more later when we get into what the soul is up to in esoterics. Now, spirit versus soul, running that into those words in these books, you don't know what they mean when you run into them. You've got to read a lot of context to see what they mean in that book. The words are so overloaded and so overused that there's not much. I mean, Lawrence recommends we just forget about using those two words in new material going forward because they're just loaded down with baggage. And they're so inconsistently used. And he even critiques Alice Bailey, who was working with Dwal Kul to bring through a big block of the facts that we have to work with about reality. He critiques Bailey for using the soul in 7 different definitions, the word soul. Consciousness in general, I'll get into, it gets technical, but I'll get into that a little bit as we get into how esoterics defines the soul. Interesting thing about esoterics, as I was talking about before, for thousands of years, the information was only given to students personally by teachers in secret knowledge orders. That is over now. It's actually published, it's available for everybody, and now it's hidden a different way. It's on the internet, amidst the billions of other pages on the internet, and it's just as hard to find as if you had to seek out the Count de Saint-Germain and his secret Rosicrucian society in the year 1520, you know? It's still hard to find, but that's what I'm trying to help with. I'm trying to aim you right at the best stuff I've found, because I've put a lot of time into looking at it, and I've got kind of a family legacy from my grandparents working on it. There's been a big effort to find this, and I want to save you the tedium of looking up the soul on Wikipedia, because that was not fun. I didn't really, I learned some good anecdotes, but not a lot about the soul.
Just type in Lawrencey.
Yeah, type in Lawrencey. There you go. That'll take you to the good stuff.
It did.
So if we're going to talk about esoterics now. And I have to, again, I don't want to be too hard on religions, because you read in the Bible that Christ said to his disciples things that he didn't say to the masses at all. And that's what esoterics was all about. And Buddha and his 900 arhats, he filled them in on everything, you know. But for the masses, you know, in the Bible, he spake unto them only in parables. You know, it really wasn't for everybody. And now we get to download it. So let's talk about that transition again from the animal to the human, because that's where the soul comes into the picture. In the animal kingdom, and there isn't enough information for me about animals in the esoteric literature. I think it would be fascinating to know what the dinosaurs were all about, and there's nothing at all in there about that. I wish there was. But one thing that you can read about animals is that there's a kind of individualization in the human kingdom, and it's the toughest thing. We're so separated from each other. We can't really necessarily totally understand each other. We're all kind of in the dark together. We're trying to be somebody without being somebody else, and you know, the whole process of being an individual is a tough challenge for us here. In the animal kingdom, they're not struggling with that, and in fact, esoterically, it says that they have group souls. The animal kingdom actually, the monads of each animal, which is an individual. Each animal is an individual as a monad. So the individual aspect goes through all the kingdoms, whether we're aware of it or not. But in the animal kingdom, those monads are in a group soul, and as animals progress closer and closer to human, the group soul has fewer and fewer members, like mosquitoes. There might be 1 billion mosquitoes in the mosquito group soul. But you get to dogs, cats, elephants, horses, and monkeys. Those are the animals that are listed in the esoteric literature as the ones that are only from that species can individualization take place. Can they make the jump to the human kingdom? There's only a few members of the group soul of those. Yet still, to be part of a group soul, I think, they don't suffer from the kind of loneliness of the human kingdom. What happens when they finally, when my dog Dolly someday looks at herself and says, "I'm Dolly," they're talking, Dolly is me. Then Dolly will not be a dog anymore. Because that's what differentiates us. And then Dolly won't need a dog body anymore, and it'll be very sad for me. But what happens next, according to esoterics, is that we acquire something new. We had, as animals, we had physical, emotional, and mental bodies. And we participated in this group soul, but as human beings, we get a new body, one that we're not aware of right now very much, called the causal body, which is made out of the material of the higher mental plane. This body is also called the soul body, and it's the repository of the distilled experiences of all of our incarnations. And actually, it doesn't matter so much if you've had an evil incarnation or a good incarnation as far as the distillation of experiences go. You're going to plant the seeds of karma and have to reap that at some point. You maybe repeat really bad patterns of thought and behavior that do stay with you coming into incarnation again. But if you've developed qualities, they are always distilled out into the causal body. And it's kind of a reservoir. It's like a, not really sleeping, but it's a real body actually that we will wake up in someday. But it's kind of a repository for all of the skills, the qualities, the virtues, the fully developed tendencies that we have, not the bad ones, just the good ones are distilled into the soul body. And when you think about it, and what esoteric says is that it takes an average of 120,000 to 150,000 incarnations to make it through the human kingdom. That's a lot of distilled experiences. And it's no wonder that we can't really handle that self that we are on that level. That body, that soul body, is everything we've ever been. And we right now can just only barely handle the little portion of that we are. When we incarnate, only a small fraction of those qualities and abilities becomes the personality in a particular incarnation, with very specific goals. We might incarnate with a very scientific mind, etc., to get us more anchored in rationality so that next incarnation we can work in esoterics without being swept away by the fantasy aspect of esoterics, because that is there. So every incarnation has its goals. We come in with a subset of all of our qualities and abilities. We are part of a clan of souls that incarnate at the same time, but we only meet some of those members. We have relationships with them and continually of parent, child, enemy, friend, husband, wife. We actually learn about these other souls that are in our clan more than any others through continual interrelationships of all kinds.
I remember in my reading of Lawrence, what he said, it stuck with me. He says that knowledge is memory renewed. So is that memory from all of our different causal existences, or?
Yeah, I think maybe he's talking about the kind of knowledge that gives you common sense in this lifetime. You might not remember the experience that you had in ancient Greece where you actually learned that. So it's not that kind of memory, but it's, you know better than doing that because you did that already. That's real knowledge.
It really stuck with me that knowledge is memory renewed. It's like it's like we're born with it. It's there. We just have to renew that memory.
But if you don't come in contact with circumstances that bring it out of you, it doesn't get renewed.
Right.
And this is what I'm attempting to do here actually, is put this knowledge back out there for anybody who's already got it. You get a chance, you read Lawrence and you get to come in contact again, it'll wake up things you already know. And it will seem like you're making really fast progress. When you get onto the new things you don't actually know anything about, things go a lot more slowly, but there are probably things all of us have yet to just reawaken in ourselves that can come out quite quickly.
We don't need all of those knowledges in each life.
Right. Right. We don't need them all necessarily because we have specific goals in a lifetime that we don't, This lifetime, I didn't get the fingers I wanted to play guitar with. But that's because that's not what this lifetime was for, actually. It turns out, unfortunately. My sister got him and she doesn't play. I don't understand. So when we can handle everything we've ever been, then we can wake up as a causal self. And there's a good, solid reason why we don't remember our past lives. And anybody who's actually had the opportunity to remember some of their past lives usually knows what that reason is. to go back and revisit the murders and the rapes and the horrible, wasted, drunken lives that all of us, and suicides. My God, we've done all those things. In 100,000 lifetimes, we've tried it all. It's no fun to go back and look at those. Although, here's an interesting thing. As a causal self, that's an awakened being, awakened causal body, our next step of awakening. When we can wake up as that self, we're still human. And from that vantage point, we can review all of our past lives and see, and it's no fun at that point. Because by the time we get to be a causal self, we don't have a lot of ego left. We don't have a lot of self-grandeur that we're trying to satisfy by trying to see if we were Napoleon in some previous life. When we get to be causal selves, we're trying to get ready to be done with being human, to move, make the jump to the next kingdom, and to have to go back and revisit all of those lives of horrible, dumb mistakes that we made is painful, but we have to do it in order to figure out what's left of our reaping, the seeds that we've planted that have yet to be reaped, that we've got to work through. Because every single thing we've done in the human kingdom that has set things in motion, good or bad, all of those effects have to come back to us and be dealt with or offset through our actions before we can make the jump to the next kingdom. We have to clean up every iota of our impact. And there are things, there's individual karma, of course, but there's group karma, there's racial karma, there's national karma, there's the human kingdom has got its own karma. We didn't get these bodies for free. There's actually nothing for free. I know it doesn't sound very nice, but the natural kingdoms have provided these bodies for us again and again and again for us to incarnate in. We actually owe the natural kingdoms for that, and we have our work to do. Humanity as a whole has its work to do, develop natural kingdoms, certainly clean up the mess we've made out of them, and progress them, lift them through our working with creative thoughts, with beautifying and organizing and healing, and humanity's got a great deal of destiny has no idea about yet. Another aspect, what I'm getting into now is in esoterics, what is this soul consciousness like? Our goal is to be soul-infused personalities. But the interesting thing is that the soul is always there waiting for us to connect with it and so that we can let that light and love flow through us. And its kind of consciousness is very different than ours. For instance, it says that the soul consciousness that we're reaching for, there is neither distance nor past time. When we can function on the higher levels of the mental plane as causal selves, any point on this earth we can put our attention on and know what is going on there. And that actually includes points in the past. And it's not just the physical locations of things in the past. We can perceive the emotions of a past event or the thoughts of the people participating in it. That's a fantastic power to have. And it's also we need that to do our service work of helping others and of clearing up our old karma. Blavatsky, for example, in her books, The Secret Doctrine and other books, she would quote from books that she could never have possibly held in her hands. But she was a causal self, and she could go look up the book in some library locked in a monastery in Egypt and relate what was in that book and quote from it and put it in her book. That's one of the great abilities of the causal self. Finally, you get to find out things about everything and get accurate information. I think I couldn't find exactly why it's called the causal self, but one thing that is clear, that on that level you can see the causes behind everything. Finally, you can see, oh, well, that's why I was born like that, or this person has that problem, or this kind of thing is going on. You can actually trace back and see the chain of causality that brought the present moment around.
Isn't that just cause and effect?
It is, but right now it's hard to trace it, and we have to really be careful right now to think that we can speculate on someone else's cause and effect. It's a very complicated matter to see where those things originate. And somebody that comes into this lifetime with a disability or something like that, there are many reasons that we don't anticipate about that, such as the soul saying, I'm going for it in this lifetime, I'm going to develop full compassion for everybody. And that's a brave soul that comes in and says, I'm going to take a position that allows me to understand compassion and it's not necessarily karmic reaping is what I'm saying. So too easy to judge people on that and say, well, must have been a real jerk for that to happen. You know, that kind of judgment is its own sowing that you don't want to reap. You know, religion paints rosy pictures of things, but I'm going to paint a rosier one still of what the soul consciousness is like. This is the beginning of immortality for us, to reach the causal self. There's no more break in consciousness at death on the causal level. The causal body does not die. At least, I'll get into it has its finite period, but the physical body certainly dies, and the emotional body dies, and the mental body dies. And then to the degree that we are identified with them, we are mortal. But we are identified with the causal body, it's the same. It stays throughout all the incarnations. When we are conscious in that body, we are aware of ourselves going into birth and into incarnation and through our lives and back out again, and there's no break in consciousness. That's immortality, really. And when we make the jump to the next kingdom, we have no more need to incarnate unless we absolutely want to for some kind of service work here. Another thing, as a causal self, we meet the other causal selves on their level and the inhabitants of the next kingdom, the kingdom of collective consciousness, the fifth kingdom. Humanity is the fourth, animal the third, vegetable the second, mineral the first. The fifth kingdom is how it's referred to, although you can look it up in the Bible too as the kingdom of heaven. And it's actually, the higher levels of the mental plane are humanity's heaven worlds. They're not the higher levels of the emotional plane, which are full of our fantasies about heaven, which you can actually stay trapped in those fantasies for a long time. My grandfather said it was once one of his jobs to, there was a particular Indian guru who had thought he had achieved full enlightenment and wasn't doing anything with it. He was in the higher levels of the emotional astral worlds, which are absolutely heavenly and wonderful. But my grandfather's job was to go shake him up and say, there's a whole lot more, wake up! Because getting up into the mental plane is where you really get the facts. The emotional worlds are populated by humanity's imaginative forms. That's all that's there. And people are really good imaginers. We've made some nice heavens there, and some really yucky hells. But the real heaven is the higher mental world of souls. And that's where we get to, we're basically omniscient in the worlds of man. That's the phrase. In the three worlds of man is what the Hindus call it. Anything we need to know about the physical world, emotional or lower mental world, we can see from the causal world. Now, you don't become a causal self with a lot of ego in place. Maybe you have stuff to clean up, but you have to have overcome the dangers of having that much power before you can actually wake up as a causal self. You've got to be trusted with it. Imagine an egotistic person who wants to play the old game of rule the world. The power that that person would have if they could access all the planetary memory and be conscious of it at any point at once from everywhere simply doesn't happen. And this is one of the good things about reaching the causal plane too. Evil that we know here, that we run into in this world, rises no higher than the lower planes of the mental world. It does not rise into the higher planes of the mental. It does not rise into the causal world, the soul world. When you're there, you are above it. You're very aware of evil in the lower worlds, but all that evil is human. There's no particular divinely satanic whatever being out there sponsoring all the evil. It's human beings. There are some incredibly evil human beings, but it's really humans that are behind the evil stuff that's going on. And when you've risen above the human levels, which really the causal body and the soul body is pretty much above, then you don't have to, you can deal with evil and fight it and actively, combat it in these worlds, but you don't encounter it there.
What about cosmic evil?
Cosmic evil, I can't really speculate on that. But in this world, what we run into is human evil. That's my understanding of it. I already mentioned this already, there's no need for a mental system. And I'm really looking forward to this because this is, it really beats Wikipedia. When you can just go out and ascertain everything you want to know, you don't need a mental system anymore because the facts are already there. You're not trying to fit facts into a theory. You don't need theories. You can ascertain the truth of things immediately. You go look. You can see how it works. You can see how your bodies work and what we're made out of and the energies that are flowing and why they're there. So that's something to look forward to.
Question.
Yeah.
How does esoterics look at the redemption of those who commit evil acts?
Or the innocence.
Say that again,
Well-
I didn't hear it. Redemption?
Innocence or redemption, yeah. Does esoteric teaching recognize innocence? And Tata was telling me that, talking about the karma and how that would relate to that. So
That's something I meant to go into and didn't mention. So let me cover that a little bit. So the question was, what about the results of evil acts? What about innocence?
I mean, isn't unconsciousness innocent?
Yes, and the thing about innocence is I think there's a judgment implied there, in even the idea of innocence, because there's an endless spectrum of activities that we're doing to get to where we are, and at every point on it, it's actually perfect to be right where you are. And people go start the human kingdom essentially both innocent and supremely selfish at the same time. They haven't planted the seeds of anything evil, but they don't know of anything but the glory of being a self finally, and they're exploring that, and it's absolutely appropriate. You can't judge somebody for being where they're at. And it's a very big scale. So it's certainly, us being this far apart in the scale is no reason to judge anybody. Innocence, I think there's a kind of innocence to the really advanced soul, that there's no egotistic pretense at all. And there's no self-defense, no need for it, because there's no ego to defend. It's only egos need to be defended. And the other thing about reincarnation, basically, how evil acts play into the soul of reincarnation. The soul is always pure, actually. It's existing on the highest levels. It has that kind of innocence too. However, the monad that's got to incarnate and reincarnate again has got to come back and pay the price for whatever it did, basically reap the consequences of the actions. Good or bad, I mean, it sounds like a harsh law, but if you think about it, those who really love other people are coming back to reap love in this world, and it's not so bad. But the cause and effect are waiting for anybody that does whatever. There actually isn't the conception in esoterics that you can be a mafia boss and on your deathbed be forgiven all your sins. All the causes that you set in motion are not going to suddenly go away. They're out there in motion. They've affected people. All of that remains. What esoterics does promise us is that we will be given the opportunity to clean up any mess that we ever made. That's something. And not all at once. This is another thing about the soul. The soul is an intelligent, inspired lover of us who chooses circumstances and incarnations and qualities for a particular arrangement for us, and never gives us more than we can handle. We somehow fail to handle it sometimes, but if we couldn't fail to handle it, well, it wouldn't be, there wouldn't really be free will if it was always too easy. All that karma, it gets saved up until we're strong enough beings. When we become causal selves, we're actually capable of working out a huge amount of karma. So I'm not quite sure how much we have to deal with at that level. Okay, so there's a third factor of how the evil carries forward. First, there's cause and effect. There is, actually just two things that carry it forward. There's the cause and effect and the patterns that actually you build into your bodies in a lifetime. A clairvoyant can look at your body and see these nasty black kind of patterns in your field, that at the core of which is a mistaken conclusion about reality, such as, I have to get everything for myself and nobody's going to help me. Well, that's a pretty negative pattern. And experiences, if you believe that deep down, your experiences will kind of feed into that. You'll create that reality for yourself and you reinforce that pattern, and it gets stronger and stronger. And every time you indulge that pattern and think it harder and again and act on it, you make it stronger. And that actually is a condensed chunk of emotional and mental matter that it actually goes from lifetime to lifetime. When you reincarnate into physical form again, you have to pick those back up again. They remain like seeds anyway in your field, and circumstances will activate them until you've purified them out. And we're going to talk about how you can do that in a little bit. I don't know if that answered your question. All right. And did you have a question?
Yes. Will there be a karmic equivalent of all the money that Bernie made off? Stole?
I wouldn't want his karma. I mean, you can make yourself a big pile of bad karma in a hurry in this world these days because you can affect so many people. Being one of the things I really hope I never do is promise to be able to enlighten people, because then you've got to do it.
If we don't have evil, we won't recognize good.
That's true.
So sometimes it's just to show us the evil.
Yep. And I gave a talk where I really went into the nature of evil, and I thought it was just fascinating to research that it actually serves to our advantage. We can make it through the human kingdom on this earth, faced with the evil we face, faster than we could in another system where there was no resistance. The resistance actually causes us to build up our power to overcome. And that, I suppose, without, I don't want to speculate for God or, the higher forces, but that, I suppose, is why evil is not eliminated, because the beings in the higher worlds could easily wipe out the human evil.
But then again, according to what you said, wouldn't Bernie be, he might have been the Robin Hood of the thieves, right? And he didn't get a bad karma at the end of that movie.
Bernie wasn't given to the poor, if I recall, or are you saying maybe that was he had so much good karma, he could burn all that money and just come out even?
Well, he's not dead, right?
Right.
His karma still is going on in this life.
That's true.
And who knows where that money would go eventually, right?
Well,
My question was is there an esoteric equivalent to that money that he will have to bear up under or
yes.
in the future?
He misused the crystallized labor of people. That's what money is.
You reap what you sow.
And he will certainly not be entitled to have great sums of it in the future, for one thing. Anything that you've managed to acquire lots of and misused, don't hope for another chance to have it again soon. You don't have the right to have it again soon. I don't know how many lifetimes it would take to generate that much wasted human labor. That's scary to think about.
It's the agony that translated into for
Right.
the elderly, that was their life saving.
Oh, it's terrible.
The suffering that they had to undergo.
There are teenagers out there who've written computer viruses that have caused agony for millions and millions of people. They're off to a bad start. All right. Let's pick up where we left off. I was talking about the qualities of the causal self and how wonderful it will be. And hopefully this is something that doesn't necessarily take millions of more years or thousands more incarnations for us. It can happen pretty quickly when you consider that so much is already there in the causal body, all these distilled lifetimes. It could be just a matter of, I don't know, a few incarnations so you really get it. I'd like to hope. But there are things you can do to help out. We don't want to force the process. It's a natural process, waking up in this way. You don't want to force it. But there are certainly things you can do to help approach soul consciousness, because the very first thing is to become a soul-infused personality, to have the light and the love of the soul reflected through your personality, purely, hopefully, without a lot of taint of ego. So let me go through some of the things you can do about that. But one thing I want to say is, it's easy to get going on a path of aspiration and just, this sounds great. The soul, yep, I recognize it. I know, I want that. I want to be the soul. I want to identify with the soul. But to quote Lawrency, the physical world is incomparably the most important since for humans, since it is in this world that all human qualities must be acquired, and it's only in this world that he has the possibility of freeing himself from emotional illusions and mental fictions. Between lives, in other worlds, we shed our physical body, we're active in the emotional world, the mental world. We're really just, it's resting time really and digesting the experiences of this lifetime. It's while we're in incarnation, physically here, that we actually work out progress for ourselves. And a big part of that is dealing with the what Bailey calls the glamours, what Lawrence calls emotional illusions, and I can list a few of those. We tend to, I got to find the right page here. We tend to emotionalize things that really we need to look at more mentally. It's the mind that is the cure, not the soul, actually, for emotional illusions. The glamour of materiality is something that Alice Bailey talks about. There's the cause of the present world distress, she said, and this was a while back, but I think it still is. Economic problems are the result of this. Money interest, overemphasis on the material aspect, the love of possessions, the trying to corner the market on to the materiality driven by fear, thinking that, well, I need at least $1 million in the bank to deal with whatever eventuality they may be. Well, you know, maybe being part of a community is a better answer than that, because that's what will really get us through just about any circumstance. It takes the mind to kick in and work on that one. The glamour of sentiment. This is a tough one. It's a misunderstanding of love, binding us to obligations that don't exist, caring for others in a way that drags them with us in order to draw out responsive affection. The soul is not keen on being tied to something out of sentiment. It needs to be real love, real service, real opportunity there. The glamour of devotion. Now, devotion, of course, is a virtue. I mean, being devoted to a teacher is a wonderful thing, but the downside of it is that it swings you into this fog of desire for the teacher, for the truth, and that blinds you and narrows your view so that you're no longer participating in the rest of the world. The solution, of course, is to forget the little self that is, it's really kind of a selfish thing to be ignoring the rest of the world just so that your devotion can be satisfied. The solution is to be bigger than the little self, be involved in other lives and other causes than oneself. And that's actually a solution to the problems of the ego in general. The glamour of the paths of opposites, you know, joy and bliss and gloom and depression. It's an overemphasis on feeling. It's really not necessarily all about feeling. The soul is not swept into this gloom and depression and bliss really either. The soul is keeping an even keel watching all this. And the more you can keep your own keel perspective on yourself, even keel and perspective on yourself, the closer you're thinking like the soul. And that actually is one of the important exercises in approaching soul consciousness, is to act as if. You know, think about this soul that is purified of egotistic desires, that is operating with conscious love and unity for all the other beings, that is able to know and see what's going on without doubt and fear, that is not subject to mortality, that just is not afraid of death or ends. Try to identify with a being that's like that. That's you, really. And the more you can see yourself as a being like that and act as if, how would a being like that act in this world? If you didn't have your personal agendas or your regrets for yesterday and your fears for tomorrow and all the stuff you can leave behind. I mean, meditation is another good way to put that stuff in perspective. If you can sit down to meditate, try to reach the level where all that stuff of yesterday and tomorrow and, oh God, what do I have to do today? All that stuff, is that important, really? I mean, look, we're monads that have gone through billions of years to get to where we are, and we have all the worlds of the universe yet ahead of us. Today's little issues, can't we put them aside for 10 minutes? You know, and that's when you can approach the soul consciousness. Yes?
Is the monad the same thing as the soul?
No, it's not actually. The monad is our unique individual self. The soul is a body that we have, like these bodies. And it turns out the soul is immortal only through the human kingdom, like the 20 million years or however many millions of years it takes us to get through the human kingdom. That soul exists throughout all of that. But when we make the jump to the next kingdom, we actually destroy the soul body. We don't need it anymore.
So are you saying when we incarnate into next life, that soul goes with us?
The soul remains in its higher level, and it just puts a portion of itself into the personality is the way to look at it, of the qualities of the soul.
So the causal body.
The causal body remains. There's what's called, and Lawrence called the triad body, and I can't go into the triads really here, but triad meaning the physical, emotional, mental that constitute our personality. That's some of the soul's qualities go into an individual incarnation. There's kind of a separation there.
qualities of
yeah.
their nature.
Well, yeah, the monad is the core of your individuality, and those qualities of the soul too. But the monads have their own tendencies. They can be repellent, attractive. Everything you've experienced as a monad, your ultimate true self remembers and is conditioned by. So
That follows you.
that's, yes, that is you.
That is you.
You,
Incarnation.
the monad is what is incarnating, what is identifying temporarily with physical, emotional, and mental bodies, and will identify temporarily with the soul body. It's our goal to identify with the soul body. Eventually we will let that go too.
So your monad would be your essence?
Your monad is it is you. It is the indestructible, immortal
Okay,
thing that you are.
okay.
Tiniest point of matter, consciousness, and motion.
But your soul body is above that. Then.
Well, the soul body, the monad actually moves through the bodies. It's like climbing a ladder of bodies higher and higher into the higher worlds. When the monad is strong enough in consciousness to identify with the soul body, we know ourselves to be souls.
Okay.
When it's strong enough to not need the soul body anymore, we're done being human. We move to the next kingdom where we get another body. And we identify with bodies on up through the kingdoms until we finally, the ultimate end of this is to be a free monad that knows itself to be all consciousness and everything, and no longer needs a body to know that, to know anything. It's so far out of reach for us, though. I don't know how much time to spend on it. Here's something else you can do. The soul is an intelligent, loving being, ourselves. It's been waiting millions of years for you, as a personality, to try to contact it. The soul operates on the levels of the divine beings that do nothing to force anybody. They do not give orders. They do not give commands. It's nothing like any kind of religious presentation of a God that's punishing or judging. Higher beings respect absolutely the law of freedom that gives us our free will, and they tell us nothing, to do nothing. However, the soul will wait patiently for millions of years for us to make the first move. And you can do that. If you're wondering what the soul's all about, if you've been finally reaching the point where you have to know, and everybody reaches that point where it's just not tolerable anymore to not know what the hell's going on, you can ask. And if you sincerely get yourself to a calm place and say, I want to know. Can you show me? If this is really the case, if there's really a soul here that I can work with, then show me. I hope some of you will do that and tell me what happens. So if we can clear out the glamours, if we can deal with the mental fictions, the mistaken beliefs that we have, they're the core of these bad patterns, we have a chance of achieving soul consciousness contact in this lifetime, especially if you ask, like I said. And if you have hit upon the big question that comes out of this talk, why is it that we are human beings that are struggling just to deal with this world and are at the same time divine souls that are omniscient in the worlds of man, have tremendous powers to do all these things, set up incarnations for us where we learn things? Well, what are we talking about? How can we be that and this? How can we be so clumsy and unable down here and be divine at the same time? I did not find the answer to that in Theosophy, in religion, in Bailey even, in any of the sources. Only in Lawrency did I get a clear answer to that. And this is the thing I was hinting at in my blurb on the talk. It's a little surprising. When we causalize, that means we make the jump from the animal kingdom and take on a soul body. At that point, we have a relationship with another being. It's the being that has provided that causal body for us, because it provides its causal body. it's our body too. We share a body with this being, the causal body. We can easily say, yes, I am this soul. But there's a being that Lawrence and in hylozoics is called egoities, a very advanced being who is the stand-in for ourselves as souls, who occupies that cause, who provides the causal body empty for us to populate with our experiences, and occupies it. Who actually, between incarnations, takes the job of finding the right parents for us, finding the right opportunities, making sure that we are making progress. I mean, the egoities pretty much ignores us in our incarnational cycle of first 60,000 incarnations or something, because we're being barbarians and we're learning through cause and effect. But as we reach this kind of level where we're using our minds and we're capable of actually understanding the kind of thoughts, the soul level, where we're capable of identifying with the causal being, our own souls, the egoities can be more involved. It is our partner, our guardian angel is another term for the egoities. It's the being that's been trying to help us this whole time and is committed to us for our entire path through the human kingdom, however many millions of years it takes. Egoities is the being we reach with prayers. When we reach for the divine, that's the being we reach. And you don't actually have to ask for anything, by the way, in prayers, because egoities knows exactly what you need. Egoities is personally assigned to you, working with you. And Lawrence says it's a man's own business whether he considers the egoities as his own self or as a separate being. Egoities wants you to identify with the causal body that it's provided. It actually wants you to think of it as you, identify with its powers and its consciousness. Eventually, we acquire all those same powers of knowledge and insight. We don't need the help anymore. And when we're finally ready to make the jump from the human kingdom, egoities is free to go on to, after his millions of years of waiting and helping us, egoities moves on. We no longer need even the causal body when we make the jump. And that's a huge transition for us.
Do they want to another being or body?
Turns out there's another equivalent of the egoities in the higher level called protogonos.
So you said moments ago that when we are ready to transcend our individual consciousness to the next level, we destroy the soul body.
If we don't need it. We recreate it at will at that point, so we no longer need this fixed
So,
soul body.
Destroy the soul body versus the egoities being the soul.
Well, the egoities is a higher level being, and its lowest body that it provided is the causal body.
Okay, so
It's actually from what's called the Buddhic level above the mental.
we don't need the soul body, the causal body, that the egoities provides for us to have all of our experiences translated into transferred to. We become all of those experiences when we're ready.
We can act on them as conscious parts of ourselves, all of our experiences, yes.
Obtain consciousness that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't need that collective point anymore, so it pops like a bubble.
Well, yeah, actually we have an effort to make to pop it, and each kind of temperament that we have, we pop it a different way. Like the first ray type person, power, will, destroys it. Just takes the kingdom of heaven by force, is what it's called for that kind of being. The second ray, love, wisdom kind of person, gradually includes everybody in the world into his causal body until he bursts it. So each of the different ray types has got a different way of destroying the causal body.
I've asked you this before, but please refresh my memory. Is the solar angel that Alice Bailey refers to the same as the egoities?
Yes. And that's,
What
it's,
did she say?
the solar angel referred to in Bailey is the egoities, and egoities is referred to in places in Bailey, but not very consistently. And Lawrence points this out.
By name?
He points out,
Also the egoities?
yes, he's got a section on Bailey where he talks, and there's actually in the handout there's a link to Lawrence's chapter on egoities where it lays it all out much better than I can.
Is holy guardian angel, like in the tree of life, is that interchangeable as well, would you say, with the solar angel and the egoities?
If it's personal
Yeah,
for each individual, it probably is.
that's the one I mean.
So when we don't need our physical bodies anymore, do we arrange our death in this plane?
Egoities has something to do with that, although for the most part it's Devic, angelic forms that are supervising. They supervise the life and the living and dying and being born, and actually the karmic stuff is all in their domain. Egoities works with them. And egoities, soul, our souls, ourselves, egoities, another being, same thing, really. This is where it gets tricky. We're not used to this idea. Are working in perfect conscious unity with all the other souls of every other individual. So that's
the unity.
That unity on that level is pretty amazing. And
It's like the little prince went up to the stars, and the little prince by the fantastic heaven.
well, actually, what I was thinking of what's going on in your life. How suddenly this job ends, and the next thing you know, you're going to Thailand. We earn the opportunities like that, but it's our souls that set those kind of things up. And we have to give them some credit. Huge things happen in our lives when we're ready, we accept them. This is the beautiful thing about egoities. The soul is continually setting up these opportunities for us. Always. And it's like the GPS unit, It sets this up for us. It says, turn left. And if you turn right, it says, recalculating. And it has to do this all the time because people don't listen to their souls very well. And we don't follow this really perfect guidance for us. The egoities knows exactly what we need, where to go, what to do, how to do it, what's good, what relationships are good, offers us these fantastic opportunities and connections, and puts books in our hands that we don't read, and does all kinds of things for us, and never gives up on us, and just keeps trying. But the most efficient way to make it to the human kingdom and be happy is to be cooperating with the plan that is perfectly tailored for you, that exists already. The egoities has come up with.
So Hollywood is really the source of illusions and not guardian angels.
Occasionally they come up with something interesting. But most of Hollywood stuff is tailored for barbarians, so. So I wanted to say one more thing about this. The soul, kind of the legacy part for me is the Rainbow Bridge work that my grandparents started back in '75. They put out the Rainbow Bridge book, and it was a result of experiments of my grandmother was able to, she had objective clairvoyance, where she could look down in nerve structure and everything on subtler levels than the physical. And actually this is coming soon for all of humanity. What Lawrence says anyway, etheric vision, the ability to sense the energy body, kind of the glowing field around the physical, is the next development in our sensory consciousness opening as a kingdom. But she would work with my grandfather, who was a very scientific sort like me, and they would do experiments and try Scientology things or whatever it was and see what actually caused things to happen. And what they realized was that anything they tried, if they invoked the soul, the Rainbow Bridge meditation starts with the soul mantra. I am the soul, I am the light divine, I am love, I am will, I am fixed design. The remaining lines after the first one are just reaffirming the first one, really. They're just the qualities of the soul. You were saying, yes, I am the soul, and these are the qualities of the soul that I am. Everything you might be trying to do in your any meditation you're doing, start with that. Start with identifying with the soul. Then you're coming from the right place. If you're trying to come at it from the personality level, it's going to get tainted with ego. You're going to kind of mess things up. The soul is always coming at it from the right angle for the best thing for you. My grandfather was my teacher for years, and I remember he asked me one time, okay, tell me how you do your meditation. And I said, well, I sit down, and I take a couple of deep breaths, and I try to get centered, and try to get left and right centered and front and back. I said, no, you start with the soul. Say the soul mantra first. You identify with the soul. It's the very first thing. Forget all this other stuff. Until you've identified with the soul, you're wasting your time. And the Rainbow Bridge work is very powerful stuff for those who really want to take it to another step and work on clearing patterns in your field. There are visualizations that like vortexes, and energy follows thought. You're working with material when you're thinking and imagining, and you can work with the material in your bodies with various techniques from the Rainbow Bridge work.
So you were telling a story about your grandma and grandfather. Was that the
Well,
conclusion of
that's the Rainbow Bridge work, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail because we're out of time. But they've got the book here in the bookshop, Phase 1 book, good start. And I guess I could say a little bit more about it. Not only did they discover that invoking the soul was critical, but they saw light structures in people's bodies. They saw something called the soul star. And the more developed the star of light was above somebody's head, that seemed to be an indication of how much the soul was active in their lives. It's not something I can verify, I can't see that, but they also saw that there was a channel of energy through the body that you could widen, that would cause you to be grounded, for energies to flow through you more easily. And if you're going to work with soul energies can be very powerful, and it's very good to actually be well grounded and not bring energy partway through and let it only get to some chakra where it blows everything up. You want energy to pass through you cleanly, and you want to widen the ability to transmit energy and not have it get congested anywhere. And that's kind of what the Rainbow Bridge techniques were about. And the techniques they worked on, my grandfather, one technique he tried almost killed him. He tried breathing exercises that opened all of his chakras at once. And if your body is still congested with all those patterns like we were talking about, it starts to, that's like fire burning in each chakra that's burning away this material and creating all this soot and smoke and garbage from burning away this congested emotional mental material. And it was killing him. He was losing weight, like 40 pounds in a week or something like that. And he went to Josephine, to my grandmother, said, I know you can see. She hadn't admitted it yet, but you have to help me. You have to help me. They came up with techniques that actually cleared all the stuff out of his field and saved his life. So don't try that.
Can I ask a stupid question? I've been reading Lawrence, and it talks about, having the mineral and then the animal and you progressing up through, right? Well, my background is nursing, and when I first heard this, I thought, I've seen people with muscle masses in their bodies and different kind of muscles, and I thought, I bet that person came from granite, where this one came from shale. Is there anything that progresses that way? That gives
It conditions you.
No.
It does condition you to some degree. Every path through all those kingdoms is unique.
Well, it's really funny because as I was thinking about this in my nursing practice and looking at patients and their body makeup, it's almost like, when you see people from Northern Europe and you see people from Africa, their bodies are changing, but the minerals changed in those continents. And I thought, is this a crazy way to think? Or, you see Northern Europeans where they're cold and it's, it's ice aged and they have all the granite and the hard rock. And
Yeah. I don't know about that.
No.
I know that the way you individualize from the animal kingdom has a big impact. It's actually possible to individualize from the effect of love, like our pets do now, or from the effect of fear, oddly enough. It can cause animals to individualize, and that, I don't think that gives them a very good start in the human kingdom. But
Well, it's funny, and I've just had these thoughts of my nursing practice, like maybe that explains how we're all physically a little different, but so much alike.
That's your perception.
It was my perception.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are plenty of mysteries out there, and I don't know about that one.
I guess it's, well, what kind of douche excuse you let in your ass, I guess.
So I just want to close with what Lawrence's little prayer was, that he starts the chapter on egoities. He says, my egoities, may your light show me the path and your energy give me the power to walk it. It's an appeal to ourselves, to our souls, to all that's divine, because that's how we reach all that's divine, is through our egoities, through our souls. Give it a try.